My name's Ollie, and since I was a teenager, I've been really interested in the brain and the mind and perception. In 2020, I got really excited because I came across a set of theories and ideas that, for me, explain how the mind works in a really lovely, coherent way. This video is a presentation of the ideas that I've come across over the last 5 years. I believe the theories are gaining traction and popularity, and I really think it might be the future of the way we think about the mind and the brain.
So there are tons of illusions out there. Everybody's seen some sort of illusion at some point in their life. Often these are visual illusions. They might pop up on Facebook as something just a little bit fun. But, they're actually really interesting, and I think that they've kind of lost a bit of the status of their importance because they kind of come across as little magic tricks. But they have something important and very deep to say about how our minds work. So I like to draw attention to a lot of these different illusions. I'm going to share a link with all of these on there so you can see them for yourself. But basically, most illusions show that our perception is working in a kind of funky way, in that what we see, what we hear, what we feel is not a direct one-to-one mapping with how things are in the real world, that these can be manipulated with small tricks so that things can appear to be different than what they actually are. And there's just so many examples of this, it's difficult to even list all of them. But they happen in all the domains of perception, visual, auditory, tactile, proprioceptive, etc. And I'd like to just make, the case that these should be taken a little bit more seriously. They're not just fun tricks, they're indicative and representative of how perception works for us on a day to day as well. So I'm going to make the kind of bold claim that we do live in a sort of simulation. We live in a brain generated simulation. Now, that doesn't mean we live in the Matrix or we just live in a dream. What we experience is grounded by causes and conditions of the world, but we really are living in a simulation, and that kind of explains how some of these illusions work, because they are altering the way in which we are generating the reality around us. So now that I've got your attention, let's explore how this might actually work. So we're humans, and we're an evolved set of organisms, and we've got built into us from birth a set of parameters that we prefer to be in. Physiological parameters like temperature, like acidity. There's so many of these physiological parameters that we need to be in to live, and we're born with those parameters, and there's nothing we can do about that. Different organisms have different parameters. Like a fish has a very different set of evolved parameters that it expects to be in right from birth. The task of the brain is to keep us within these preferred parameters for most of the time. Small deviations we can survive, but long term we won't. Here's the kicker. The brain, whose responsible task for keeping us in these parameters, is located within the skull. Inside the skull it's dark, it's silent, and the brain only has access to sensory impressions that come in through the senses. It's got to infer everything about the outside world. The world outside of the skull has to be inferred. So this idea of inference is really important. Not only is the brain sort of cut off from the outside world and reliant on inference, if you just sit and listen for a while or just look out there, you'll realize that the sensory impressions that come in are very transient, unreliable, and noisy signals. There's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of background static, if you like. Most of the visual scene is, when it's sort of unpassed, very chaotic. So how on earth is the brain meant to make useful inferences from this noisy signal and maintain the organism that is responsible for with all these different parameters? So here's the trick. The brain makes a best guess, and then it simulates what it thinks the inner and outer world is like. So it's trapped in this box, but it creates a simulation, it creates a best guess of what's out there. So in a sense, we are living in a matrix. It's just the matrix is generated by ourselves, and it's based off causes out there in the world. So what you hear, what you see, what you feel, it's not the real object, right? If such a thing exists, it's just the brain's best guess given the information that it has. And this makes a lot of sense with our illusions now, that we're making best guesses given the information, and often in illusions, the information has been manipulated slightly to change how we would make our guesses. And this is true of pretty much every illusion, no matter which sensory modality. It also makes sense of things such as the blind spot that we have in our eye, where we've actually got a section of our retina that doesn't receive visual signals like the rest of the eye, but we just don't see this in our day-to-day, where we fill in the blanks. We see what we expect, and therefore we can fill in the blanks with our expectations, with our simulation. So some of you might be thinking, oh, cool, like, so does that mean our brain is like ChatGPT, and it's like this massive LLM with loads of information, and we're just trying to predict the next token? Well, there might be some similarities, but really our brain is quite different to how an LLM works. We're not born with these massive data sets in our brain. We've had to train ourselves from birth to where we are now on a scarcity of data. And so we need a slightly more efficient method for making our predictions and generating our simulations. We can use something in the field of Bayesian statistics to do this, and this is what the current theory of predictive processing is getting at. We make the best predictions given the sensory evidence that we have, and we combine it with our prior knowledge of what is most likely. So our experience and our memory of past events can give us an idea of how likely something is to happen, and we can combine that with our sensory information that we have at the time. And this will help us build models. This helps us build our simulations, and these simulations are very rich. They're very, very rich generative models that can make us make sense of the world. So we're not really so much like ChatGPT, we're more like robots that have been put out into the world and trained on every single type of task and sensory modality you can think of for as long as we've been living. We're embodied within the world, we're embodied creatures. Now our models that we have, these predictions that we have about what is most likely happening right now, right here, right now, they need constant revision. And we're incentivized to update these models and gather more evidence. Now, there's something that's called prediction error within this system, and these are signals that, okay, we made a prediction, but our best guess is wrong, and so we need to do something about that. This is how our brain solves its main task. It simply guesses that in the long term, we're going to be within our preferred states. And so long as we aim to reduce our prediction error when we're not in these states, we're going to end up in our preferred area. So we predict long term what we're going to be in, what states we're going to be, and we adjust our models and our actions accordingly to fit that. So we can solve a pretty difficult computational problem for the brain to try and work out how we can maintain all these different parameters. We just say, okay, these are the preferred states that we want to be in. We predict that that's what's going to happen, and then we make it so. So we now have a framework to apply to different areas of brain science, and so predictive processing is nice because it allows us to bring together different areas of brain science and cognitive science under one banner. In a similar way that evolution does in biology, we can bring disparate areas together under one framework, one set of language, one set of concepts. And maybe we are a bit overzealous in this and we miss the mark a few times, but I think it's really interesting and I think it's really helpful. So predictive processing also makes sense of a bunch of things that are difficult to explain otherwise. Like, have you ever just ran down the stairs in the dark, like you can't see anything, and you're just legging it down the stairs, and somehow you just manage to hit, every step perfectly, and you get your way down? Maybe this is more of a young person's task, or a fully able-bodied person can do this, but a lot of people can do this. Or hitting a baseball when a baseball is thrown at you at a high speed and you can hit that thing. Now imagine actually having to train yourself how to do this, as it was like, okay, move the bat up a little bit, move the bat down a bit, like all of these different things had to be computationally worked out in that way. It'd be really difficult. And it's really difficult because training a robot to leg it down the stairs is something that's really difficult to do, to pre-program something like that. But if you have a model where it's like, okay, here's a prediction, like I'm going to be able to get down the stairs, and you can predict the movements of that would be like, and you can say like, well, when I move my leg up a bit, it feels like this, and when I move my leg down a bit, it feels like this, and we know what it feels like. We know what it feels like to walk. We can make those predictions, and we can fine tune our movements based on small alterations in how something feels to what we expect it to feel like. Then we have an amazing ability to, proprioceptively adjust in the moment very, very quickly, and it gives us these skills like hitting a baseball or running down the stairs. So actions can be re-seen not as like programs of like what we want to do with targets and how we make them, but they're just the fulfillment of proprioceptive predictions. Emotions can be re-seen as the predicted feelings that we feel like we should be having given a context, and the interoceptive feedback, so the inner feedback from within us, like our heart rate, the sweat, but also all of these inner emotive feelings, tension, stress. We add all those up together and we say, okay, I'm feeling happy. And this can kind of explain how we can have those switches as well between excitement and anxiety, because they are overall predictions based on those signals, and they can switch quite quickly. Memory can be seen as a way of storing and updating our priors, which we need. We need this prior information to help us understand the likelihood of future events. And memory is our way of storing that, and it's also our way of updating it, because we can update our memories when we get new information. Attention is really interesting, and in this model is really, really important. Attention can be understood as how closely we should sort of be listening to the prediction error. So when prediction error arises, when we realize that there's something different between what we expect and what's happening, we can either ignore that information and say, I don't care, like, we're making this prediction, don't worry about it, it's fine. And this is sort of when you're driving along and you're not really paying too much attention, but you sometimes find out that you've driven for 10 minutes and you haven't really thought about it too much. You've got a top-down model, a prediction model of where you should be, position in the road, etc. And small alterations in the side of your vision, you're not going to worry about too much. But when you're under, a situation where you need to have really high attention, so say it's very misty or there's poor weather conditions, then you're really looking out for the slightest changes in what you're expecting, so you can act on that, update your model about what's going on as quickly as possible. So attention can be re-seen, and it can be seen as deciding how to prioritize the prediction error, whether to drive it up the system and update the models, or whether to depend on the top-down predictions that are being made. Predictive processing is useful as a model for looking at psychedelics and how psychedelics might work. And one current theory is that psychedelics have this ability to loosen the top-down models. So these are these sort of overarching big models that we have, the narratives that we have about ourselves, etc. It can loosen those up, shake the snow globe, so to say, and maybe that's how it could be useful for things like depression and gambling, etc. And then also has something to say about meditation. So lots of different types of meditation out there, but many of them work in a way of changing, altering attention in some way, and therefore giving you the ability to selectively change which predictive error signals you're listening to, whether to drive them up the hierarchy or whether to dampen them down. And it can be used to explain a wide range of different states that are in concentration meditation, as well as maybe some of the benefits of things like mindfulness. So I hope this has been interesting. I certainly think that it's a topic that is endlessly interesting, and there's so many different avenues that can be explored. I really do see it as a framework and a springboard for further inquiry. It's not the final word. There's definitely more to be explored about this, but go and check out those illusions I mentioned and really ask yourself, like, how can I explain this without some sort of model like this? Like, we need to sort of look at these illusions and take them seriously and think to ourselves, okay, maybe we really are living in some sort of simulation, and if we are living in some sort of simulation, how might that work? And I think predictive processing's got a really good story about that.